everyone, welcome to this month's Star Wars book review, where I will be taking a look at the works of Timothy Zahn, the famed author of the Thrawn trilogy, which, as I have said many times before, is my favorite Star Wars book. They're my favorite Star Wars books, and it's my favorite piece of Star Wars media outside of the movies, the original movies specifically. I love the Thrawn trilogy, and I really enjoy most of Timothy Zahn's work and what he's brought to Star Wars. By default, he is my favorite Star Wars author. By virtue of creating the Thrawn trilogy and the characters of Mara Jade and Grand Admiral Thrawn, I just love what Timothy Zahn has added to the Star Wars mythos, as it were. And I really appreciate his work. Now, this is going to be kind of a two-part series where I'm going to be covering Timothy Zahn's work. Part 2 will be happening in November, where I have a couple of books there that are under a specific theme. I don't want to say what it is yet, but for this month, I'm going to be covering 3 books that Timothy Zahn wrote that took place in a very specific time frame in the Star Wars timeline. Now, in the expanded universe, and they may have kept this for the Disney timeline, I don't know if they have, but the years were tracked very similarly to us. There's the way we track our years, there's BC and AD, and that whole system for tracking years. In Star Wars, they do something very similar, where it's BBY and ABY, before the Battle of Yavin and after the Battle of Yavin. So these books take place in 0 ABY, 0 after the Battle of Yavin. Now, I guess it makes sense for fans, for that to be able to follow where exactly it takes place in the timeline. Although within universe, it doesn't make a lot of sense that the Battle of Yavin would be this major designation point for where to be the cutoff and where to start counting upwards for the years. But in any case, that's how it is. And all of these books take place in 0 ABY, 0 after the Battle of Yavin. So very shortly after Episode 4, A New Hope. And the books also have a lot of heavy focus on Han Solo, but the first one we're going to be looking at is Scoundrels, which, as I've said, focuses very heavily on Han Solo. And in many ways, this is actually what I would have wanted out of a Solo movie, more so than what the Solo movie gave us. And I've said this before in my review of the Solo movie and my review of the Han Solo trilogy. The big mistake that the Solo movie made was that it took everything that we knew about Han from A New Hope and all the stuff that he talked about, the Kessel Run and, him working with Jabba the Hutt, which is alluded to at the end of the movie, his friendship with Lando and how they met and how he got the Falcon away from Lando, which we learn in Empire Strikes Back. That's shown in the movie. They basically took everything that we knew about Han from the original movies and just put it all into one story. And to me, that kind of shortchanges the character, because I feel like all of those things that we learned in the original trilogy took place over an entire lifetime. The movie also shows how he met Chewie. I've reviewed the Han Solo trilogy, and I'm about to review Scoundrels, and none of those books depict how Han met Chewie. That's in separate media. So a lot of these stories take place over the course of Han Solo's life, and that's the way it should be, because, I like to think of him as this scoundrel and pirate and adventurer that was, gallivanting all over the galaxy long before the events of where we see him in Episode 4, A New Hope, and he joins the rebellion. And so I was always happy to see books like Scoundrels and books like the Han Solo trilogy, because it just paints the picture that, Han and Lando and Chewie, they had a ton of different stories and had a ton of different adventures, separate from what we saw in the movies. So as far as giving us that kind of fun adventure for what we expect out of Han Solo, I thought this book was very, very enjoyable. Now, what is it about? Well, Timothy Zahn himself described it as Ocean's 11, but in Star Wars. And that's basically what it is. So Han Solo is called up to take part in a super heist. There's a villainous crime lord by the name of Villacor, which is about the most evil-sounding name I think I've ever heard in any of these Star Wars books, outside of some of the Sith names like Darth Ravage and Lord Scourge. But Villacor, who's a member of the Black Sun, which, is, you may remember, is the organization run by Prince Xizor, who's the main villain of Shadows of the Empire. And Han has to put a team together to perform this heist. There's a MacGuffin involved, a cryodex, I believe, memory serves me right, is what it's called, which is this ancient Alderanian kind of encryption device that holds important key information that the Black Sun can use to advance its own power. And it's kind of a MacGuffin throughout the story, but in putting this team together, Han's got to find all the con artists and all the thieves that he can find. There's 2 twin sisters, there's a sleight of hand expert, there's a shipjacker, and all these different ne'er-do-wells that Han has to pull this heist off with. There's also kind of like a fun... I know there's the Ocean's 11 comparison, but I'm also kind of thinking Reservoir Dogs a little bit. Not quite, but there's a little bit of that flavor there. And of course, as I've said before in other videos, Reservoir Dogs is my favorite Tarantino film. So any comparisons to that is going to be good in my book. And the most notable members of this team are obviously Chewbacca, because he doesn't go anywhere without Chewbacca. And Winter, who was a character that was created for the Thrawn trilogy and ends up being the nanny, basically, to the Solo children in the Thrawn trilogy and a close confidant of Princess Leia. Well, I guess this is how Han and Winter met. Winter is somebody with a absolute perfect memory and is perfect for missions like this. So this was the first crossing of the paths between Winter and the larger Star Wars family involving the Skywalkers and the Solos. And of course, also along on this mission is one Lando Calrissian, who is already on kind of sour terms with Han over a previous incident between them. Probably, memory serves me right, it's him stealing the Falcon from him, but not stealing the Falcon, but you know what I mean, winning the Falcon from him. And yeah, so you've got all these like kind of devious personalities, all these fun characters, and 3 of the most popular Star Wars characters in Han Solo, Chewbacca, and Lando, and they all have to use their particular skills to kind of fit into this puzzle piece and execute this plan and rob Villecor's vault and uncover a conspiracy that could ultimately screw them over if they're not careful. So a lot of backstabbing, a lot of fun, a lot of that kind of heist movie element. Like I said, the comparisons to Reservoir Dogs and Ocean's 11. I think it's a very fun read. If I have any knocks on it, the other members of Han and Chewie and Lando's team don't stand out as much. They feel like really overshadowed by the presence of Han, Chewie, and Lando, and none of them really get to shine all that much on their own. They kind of feel like they're just there to fill a position. All right, we need the thief here. We need the sleight of hand expert here, which that's kind of a neat skill to have in Star Wars, I think, just being the guy who's like basically a magician and doing that kind of stuff. So there's some fun to be had with them. It's just that they're not the most memorable characters. It also doesn't help that, you know, in the expanded universe, you get those anagram sounding names. There's, you know, one of them's named Dozer, one of them's named like Blink, I think, or one of the twin sisters is named Blink and Tavia, I believe their names are. But again, it's like expanded universe Star Wars. They all kind of sound like anagrams after a while. But, you know, other than that, I thought the book was a really fun read. I think it's, you know, it's always fun to get stuff that kind of separates itself from the Force and the Jedi. And given its placement in the timeline, it's actually really cool, and I'll have more to say on the other 2 books that I'm reviewing about this, but it's really cool that in the time between Episode 4 and Episode 5, Han wasn't a full-on true believer in the rebellion yet. He still had to kind of be won over a little bit. And we're going to see more of that development with the other 2 books that I'm covering, but I do kind of like, because that is like one of the more mysterious periods in Star Wars history, because there is a bit of a time jump between episodes 4 and 5. It's like, God, what happened in the time in between? And some writers have had had a lot of fun with that, even in the new Disney canon. The Marvel Comics shows like the evacuation of Yavin Base as the Imperials try to attack it shortly after the Death Star's destruction. And that's where we get Luke and Vader's first meeting. So the gaps between the films, there's actually like a lot of material that's worth covering. And I guess, you know, as a kid watching the movies, I wouldn't think that there would be, but, you know, you get some good writers involved with some creative minds, and you can get, like, extra layers added to Han Solo's development. It's like, oh, no, he wasn't a strict rebel right away. He was still trying to pay off his debt to Jabba the Hutt, and he kind of saw this mission as, like, the easy way, you know, the quick and easy way to accomplish that. But ultimately, he has a moment of softness at the end of the book as he decides to give the information obtained, the valuable information obtained during the mission. And he decides to turn it over to Rebellion to help them. So, he's a scoundrel, but deep down, he's the thief with a heart of gold. And that's how we love Han Solo. So, as far as an adventure for Han Solo and fun time with that character, and you get to see Chewie doing stuff and them interacting with Lando and all of that stuff. And as a basic heist story, again, separating itself from all the other stories, which almost always include the Force and almost always include the Jedi. It's fun to kind of get away from that once in a while and show, what's going on outside of the universe. One of the reasons I liked Rogue One. It's one of the reasons I consider it to be the best of the Disney movies, however that means. But, take from that what you will. But I do kind of like it. We can get away from the Force and the Jedi once in a while and show other aspects and other sides of the galaxy and other smaller conflicts that might be going on in the background of the larger story. So, and that's what the expanded universe was good for. So yeah, Scoundrels, quality read, really enjoyed it, and another solid entry in Timothy Zahn's work. Next up in my examination of Timothy Zahn's works is Allegiance, which I do not own a physical copy of, but I do own through audible.com, the audiobook version of it. I know I've plugged Audible in the past. They are not a sponsor of mine. I have no sponsors. Basically, I'm just a jerk that makes videos on YouTube. But yeah, Audible's really good, and I really like it, and that's where I get all my audiobooks. So the Allegiance one is quite good, so I highly recommend that. So what is Allegiance about? I think what I really like about this book is how it focuses on three different entities, shall we say. More than three characters, but three entities. You have Mara Jade getting a lot of focus, Han Solo getting a lot of focus, and a group of rogue stormtroopers called the Hand of Judgment that break away from the Empire and go off and basically become vigilantes through a bit of an incident that forces them to desert. Led by Larone, and includes members like Quiller and Brightwater and a few other names. And what do all three of these entities have in common? They're all questioning their allegiance to some degree. We all know how Mara Jade turns out based on the events of the Thrawn trilogy. We know how Han Solo turns out based on the way the original movies played out. He's questioning his allegiance to the rebellion and whether or not he actually belongs in the rebellion, whether or not he should be taking orders from the princess and General Riker and everybody else that's giving him orders when he feels like he shouldn't be taking orders from anybody. I'm my own man, damn it. And with Mara Jade, we see her in the early stages of being the Hand of the Emperor, which is, basically fleshing out her backstory that was explained in the Thrawn trilogy. We get to see her run missions, uncovering an embezzling scam being run in the Empire, and basically weeding out the undesirables within the Empire's infrastructure. We even get to see her interact with Darth Vader, which is very interesting because of Mara Jade's future. We know that she becomes his posthumous daughter-in-law, but here we get to see them as two agents of the Emperor. Darth Vader does not seem to like her very much. I like to think that, especially in the expanded universe, that based on the way he treated Prince Shizor and how hostile he was towards him in Shadows of the Empire, and even we get to see it a little bit in Rogue One as Director Krennic tries to get closer to the Emperor, and Vader doesn't seem to like that very much. I got the idea in my head that Vader doesn't like anybody that tries to get close to the Emperor. And there's a part of him that's like, I'm his favorite. And he just instantly doesn't like people like Mara Jade and Prince Shizor and Director Krennic, who are all trying to get close to the Emperor. So that's a fun little character trait for Vader. And it's also fun to see Mara Jade and the Emperor, or Mara Jade and Vader interacting, albeit briefly, just to say that it happened. And so in these early stages of her being the Hand, we get to see her, what she does in her job and how far she's willing to go to accomplish her missions. And with the Hand of Judgment, they are ordered to kill innocent civilians, which they don't want to do. And in a scuffle, Larone, the leader of the Hand of Judgment, accidentally kills the Imperial officer who's questioning them, and because of that, the group of them has to go on the run, and like I said, they ultimately become vigilantes helping out innocent people. And we start off with those 3 different plot threads with Han and Mara Jade and the Hand of Judgment. And they all intersect as there is a common enemy that strikes at all 3 of them. The Hand of Judgment, Han Solo, and Mara Jade. And Han Solo, by extension, the Rebellion. So basically you have the Rebellion, the Emperor, like the higher tier, through Mara Jade getting involved, and this rogue element with these fallen stormtroopers all getting involved as well. And there are space pirates initiating attacks and robbing people and doing what pirates do. Even in the Star Wars universe, pirates do what they do. They rape and pillage and steal and do everything they want. But because they're proving to be a thorn in the side of the Empire and the Rebellion, everybody's from these 3 plot threads are dispatched to deal with the threat. And really what makes this book work so well for me, and it's fun to follow Han and it's fun to follow Mara Jade, especially Mara Jade, getting her backstory fleshed out is really neat. Really the heart and soul of the book, though, is the Hand of Judgment. I really like that group of stormtroopers, the way they interact with each other, the way they talk to each other, and their whole conflict. And Lerone having to lead these very capable, but also, fallen to the wayside stormtroopers that aren't fully 100% on board with what the Empire preaches and what they're ordered to do, not wanting to kill innocent civilians. I think they make up the real heart of the book, and really Timothy Zahn's greatest contribution in this book is the Hand of Judgment. I love those guys. I think they're a really great bunch of characters, especially Lerone, who's the leader. And it's fun to see them play off of the other rebels, because we see Luke get involved and we see Han, and they ultimately join forces to help deal with the pirates. The only criticism I guess I have here is that, and it's kind of a fun thing, but it also gets a little annoying as well, and I'll use the Clone Wars as an example of this. In the Clone Wars TV show, General Grievous and Anakin Skywalker they never meet in the TV show, because it's clearly shown in Revenge of the Sith that is the first time that they met. So in the TV show, which takes place between episodes 2 and 3, Anakin and Grievous can never interact with each other. So in one way, that's very limiting and kind of annoying that they have to Texas two-step around having them around together. Sometimes it's hilarious, because there was one episode where both of them are unconscious and taken hostage, and there's a trade for both of them. So they're both on screen together, but they're unconscious, so technically they didn't meet. And I'm like, wow, that's really, really stretching here. We run into a similar problem here, and I don't know if you would even call it a problem, but Mara Jade is involved in this mission. So are Luke and Han and the other rebels. But we know they don't meet until the events of the Thrawn. They don't officially meet until the events of the Thrawn trilogy. And Mara Jade was there at Jabba's palace as the events played out that we saw in Return of the Jedi, disguised as one of Jabba's dancers. But Luke and Han didn't know who she was, so that almost doesn't count. So obviously, by virtue of how the Thrawn trilogy plays out and all of those events, Mara, we can't see the Emperor's Hand version of Mara Jade as the Emperor's agent working alongside Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, because it just wouldn't make any sense. It would contradict. So that's one place where like the intersecting plot lines kind of doesn't live up to its potential by virtue of canon. It can't live up to its potential because of that. But it's also kind of funny to see, is like, all right, how are they going to write around Mara Jade not meeting these people? And it gets, in a way, it gets even funnier in the next book I'm going to cover, but we'll get there when we get there. But other than that, I think Allegiance is a really, really fun read. It's not the most like complicated story or anything, but again, I think it's as a character study of and the common theme of allegiance is like what it means to be loyal to your cause, and what you should do in the name of that cause. And we see that through the Stormtroopers. We see it through Han Solo. Is Han Solo willing to sacrifice his independent spirit and his individuality to help out the rebellion and take orders from them, from the higher-ups in the rebellion? Are the Hand of Justice willing to follow orders that they don't want to follow in order to serve the Empire? Clearly they're not, especially Lerone. Mara Jade, how far will she go to please her master, the Emperor, who she is fully loyal to at this point in her history? So all of that is very interesting. I think it makes for a very, very fun read, and probably my favorite book out of the ones I'm reviewing today. And just enjoyable time all around. And like I said, I listened to the audiobook version of it. Highly recommend getting it. It's actually quite good. As most Star Wars audiobooks are. I haven't had a bad one yet. But yeah, again, check out audible.com. It's great. But yeah, I think Allegiance is a very, very good read. And one aspect to it, going back to the Hand of Judgment, I really like it when the Stormtroopers get individual personalities, because it's easy to think of them as just faceless bodies that get shot by the good guys. But, you see little moments in A New Hope, especially, that kind of humanizes them a little bit. Like, they'll have, like, random conversations while Obi-Wan is sneaking around a Death Star. And it's like, okay, there are humans underneath that helmet. Even the famous blooper of the Stormtrooper hitting his head walking through the door, which now is a documentary, by the way, which I think is like a blooper that made it into the final cut of Star Wars, now has a documentary. I think that's really, really funny. But things like that. All right, they're human beings under there. They're normal people following orders. And that kind of went away as the movies progressed. It's really not there in Empire. It's really not there in Jedi. And it's definitely not there when the clone troopers show up in episodes 2 and 3. Not much. I mean, Obi-Wan kind of talks to Commander Cody, but there's not much of an individual personality there. And I guess you kind of see it in the sequels with Finn. But even then, it's kind of rare. You did get that kind of fun moment where Kylo Ren is destroying the room, and the two troopers are like, "Oh, fuck this! I'm not going in there." So that was kind of funny. But you also got the traitor trooper in the sequel trilogy, which might be the best like side/background character that they've come up with in the sequel trilogy. Just a random stormtrooper that yells "traitor." It's kind of great. But yeah, I think Allegiance is very good. I'm going to give it an A. I think it's definitely worth your time and definitely worth a look. And the final book I'll be covering today is Choices of One, which is basically a direct sequel to Allegiance. It pretty much picks up right where that book left off with the Hand of Judgment and Mara Jade and Han Solo, and then just builds off of that moving into this story. Structured very similarly, where it's a bunch of different characters and different plot threads, and they all kind of converge based on this one conflict. It's a little bit more complicated than Allegiance because there's a lot more going on and a lot more characters to follow. They're actually, on top of Mara Jade, the Hand of Judgment, and Han Solo, they throw Commander Pelion and Grand Admiral Thrawn into the mix, who's not quite a Grand Admiral yet. He's still kind of early into his career. I think he's a captain at this point. And we get a detailing of how Pelion and Thrawn meet for the first time, which is cool to see, but it also makes the book like a little bit tougher to follow because it keeps jumping from one plot thread to another. And actually, Thrawn and Pelion don't start together. They actually meet as everything converges towards the end of the book. So it's basically 5 plot threads all converging based on this one conflict. So it gets a little complicated at times, but not to the point that it's unreadable. So it's still a very enjoyable read. So in this story, we, like I said, we follow up with all the characters that we followed up in Allegiance, with Pelion and Thrawn thrown into the mix. And the conflict here is taking place near the Outer Rim. There is a Imperial governor that sent notice to the rebellion that he wants to defect and provide the rebellion with a new base, which, as we know, in the period between episodes 4 and 5, they are on the lookout for a new base. So this sounds very, very good to them, and this Imperial governor working alongside them will be very beneficial to the rebellion. And this catches the attention of Mara Jade and the Emperor, who sends Mara Jade to go deal with it. And it turns out there's a much greater conspiracy at hand. Well, before Mara Jade meets up with the governor, she actually recruits the Hand of Judgment. At the ending of Allegiance, Mara Jade unofficially recruits the Hand of Judgment as her own personal, personal contacts to use in special missions like this. So she employs Larone and the gang again. So they're all along with her, and they actually disguise themselves as stormtroopers, which I love. Former stormtroopers disguise themselves as stormtroopers to help break into the governor's palace, which is kind of great. Let it never be said that Star Wars writers don't have a sense of humor. And of course, yeah, if anybody's going to disguise themselves as the stormtroopers, naturally the former stormtroopers would be able to do that. But in any case, she meets up with the governor, and as it turns out, he's being blackmailed into helping the rebellion because his family's been kidnapped by this evil warlord named Nuso Ezva. Let me make sure I've got that named. Is it here? It's actually one of the simpler names. I feel like I should know that, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it's Nuso Ezva, but if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But he's trying to have his forces kind of like take over the Outer Rim region, and that's going to cause problems for the rebellion. And the rebellion's basically being led into a trap. And this warlord is pulling the strings from within the Empire, as it turns out. And the forces of Thrawn, Pelion, Mara Jade, the Hand of Judgment, Luke Skywalker, and Han Solo all need to get involved to kind of unravel this whole mystery. Han Solo at this point has been left with a choice where he's not happy that he's being left out of the important information for the missions. It's like, well, if you accepted an officer's commission within the rebellion, you'd be privy to those important meetings and you would get the information that you want. And Han's not fully ready to commit. Of course, by the end of the book, he accepts the rank of lieutenant, and that leads into Han having a high position within the rebellion that we see in Empire Strikes Back. So, no surprise there. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that Han ultimately does accept a commission within the rebellion. But, so with all this going on, and once again, Mara Jade does not meet up with Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, but there is a portion towards the end where they're in the same area, and Luke sees her off in the distance using her lightsaber and everything, but they never actually meet. Which, again, is one of those funny things. It's like, all right, we can have them around the same area as each other, but we can't actually have them meet each other. But really, I talked about how the Hand of Judgment was my favorite part of the last book. I think Mara Jade is my favorite part of this book, where we see a little bit more of a softness to her character. She isn't just a cold-blooded killing machine, and some of that, like, hint of humanity that would help her come over to the right side in the Thrawn trilogy, it was there even at this early stage of her life, or during this time of her being the Emperor's hand. She goes to interrogate the governor, fully prepared to kill him. And then it turns out, it's like, yeah, I'm being blackmailed, my family was kidnapped, and my wife and kid will be killed if I didn't send that message to the rebellion. And then she's basically like, fuck. I have to go find the family and save them. So, first instance of her, again, showing a little bit more humanity beyond just being the Emperor's puppet. She also seems to care about the Hand of Judgment, not just as, like, tools or soldiers to help her out, but at the end of the book, she has a moment where she kind of like, oh God, I hope they're okay. I don't know where they ended up, but I hope they are okay. Of course, I know how the Hand of Judgment ended up, and the ending they get is kind of great. I kind of like how they ended up. I won't spoil it, but the ending they ultimately get is pretty sweet. And, even though throwing Thrawn and Pelion to the mix made the book feel a little overly bloated, it is very cool to see them meet for the first time, because I think Pelion is an underrated character in the expanded universe. I think he's the Watson to Thrawn's Sherlock Holmes, which is not a profound statement because Timothy Zahn has said so himself at the con I attended. So, but it's still really nice to see that. I almost wish it had been its own separate book. I think that probably would have worked a little bit better if we get the Thrawn Pelion book and then get Choices of One, where it's, again, more of a sequel to Allegiance, where it's just Mara Jade, Han Solo, and the Hand of Judgment. But as it is, it almost feels like the Rebellion and their role kind of feels tacked on. It almost feels like this could have been, like, strictly a book about what the bad guys are doing or what the bad guys are doing. And that probably would have been better. But again, it's always fun to get Han Solo. It's always fun to get Mara Jade. And it's always fun to get Thrawn thrown into the mix. So, I'm not complaining for sure. And Thrawn has some really great moments, especially towards the end, as the mystery of what's going on and who's pulling the strings is being unraveled. Pay attention to the character of Lord Odo, who's aboard the Chimera, which Pelion is stationed at the Chimera, but Thrawn is not yet. So we get to see Thrawn on his ship for the first time towards the end of the story, what ultimately becomes basically his flagship. And Lord Odo, quite a mysterious character, worth paying attention to. And no connection to Odo from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, I promise. But yeah, overall, I think the mystery surrounding everything is fun. I think the conflict is fun, and I think these specific characters that they focused on are all characters that I already liked, from Thrawn and Pelion to the Hand of Judgment to Mara Jade to Han Solo. We even get to see Luke Skywalker still. He's kind of like a bumbling, I don't want to say bumbler, but he's not a polished Jedi yet, and he's being put in a position where him being a Jedi in training carries some like political weight, so he's kind of being used in that aspect, and people expect great things from him, even though he hasn't really shown any great aptitude in the Force or even how to use a lightsaber yet. But the fact that he's like a Jedi in training is being used for political gains, which is quite interesting. Something that we don't really get to see in the movies. But again, one of those interesting things that the expanded universe could expand on and give us more of. So that was also fun to see as well. So yeah, all three of these books, I think, very solid works by Timothy Zahn. I really enjoyed all three of them. I think Allegiance is the best of the three. I think Choices of One could have been better had it been like simplified a little bit. I think there's a little too much going on. It's easy. It's easy to get lost if you're not consistently reading it. Like if I could imagine if you like read a little bit of it and then didn't get back to it again for like a week or two, you'd be like, wait, who are these people again? Do I have to start over? Probably so. But in any case, I really enjoyed all three of these books. I think they're great examples of what Timothy Zahn brought and his understanding of the Star Wars universe and how to expand on these characters outside of what we see in the movies and still make them feel true to themselves, which is an important trait to have. So, yeah, three very solid reads. I highly recommend them. And in November, I will talk about more books written by Timothy Zahn, so be on the lookout for that. But until then, later, everybody.